We live. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Round the 412 Fantasy Football Show, proudly presented by Crowworthy. Winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, fantasy, and more. You can follow at Crowworthy on Twitter and visit us at crowworthy.com. You can also visit Crowworthy Pittsburgh City page for podcasts such as this one, blogs, and more. I am Smitty. With me, as always, my co-host, Donnie Druin.
Smitty, I think as Alvin Kamara owners, we were expecting a lot better of a podcast this week.
I got the pitchforks ready for us.
Same. Let's go, brother. Let's tear everything down. Taysom Hill coming for you.
Yeah, as I always mention, we're trying to switch it up topics-wise every single week to bring you guys something new, not regurgitate the same stuff over and over again. So if you follow us on Twitter, which you should be, at Around the 412, you'll know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to go over New Orleans fantasy outlook, which we just kind of alluded to right there. We're going to play a little over-under game. We both have some over-unders that we're going to give to each other, and we're going to say what we think. Stardom, sit-ems, and then, of course, we have some waiver guys that we would pick up if you're looking for some streaming options as we looked at the last week of the fantasy football regular season coming up. Pretty insane, at least for most leagues. It should be, because if you play in week 17, my recommendation is get out of that league.
Yeah, my home league, we finished in week 16, but our last week of the regular season is week 14 since we only have 4 playoff teams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You know what? Actually, good thing. My co-host of Around the 412 that isn't Donnie for the regular show, Tyler, texted me yesterday. He's like, "You realize we only have 4 playoff teams right now?" And I was like, "Really? I never fixed the settings." So I had to go and change that because I erased. Essentially, we have been doing fantasy football. My league, I've really been doing it since like 08, something like that, something crazy. And I had to delete that league because of everything that's going on. We had some people drop out and stuff. So essentially start a league over again. And I must have forgot to adjust the settings to 6 playoff teams. So we were sitting at 4 and he said that. And I was like, well, that is not going to be the case with how many teams we have in this league. So, but anyway, we're excited to get in and dive into those topics. As soon as I tell you guys about our sponsor, this is a new ad read for our sponsor. They've been our sponsor. I almost said new sponsor. They are our current sponsor, but it's a new ad read, being that today, Donnie, is December 1st, the last month of 2020. Thank God.
Merry Christmas.
Well, I know people are going to start looking for those stocking stuffers. So looking for the ultimate stocking stuffers for the holiday season, look no further because their sponsors, Manscaped, have the tools to make you win this year's stocking stuffer or white elephant competition. Manscaped is the only brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming and hygiene products. And great news, they just released their products across Europe, Canada, and Australia. I pretty much have everything across the line they sell. I actually just got a new thing of body wash and the cologne yesterday. The cologne actually comes in a new bottle. I should have brought it down with me. Remind me next podcast. I'll show it to everybody. Comes in a cool new bottle. A few of their products are prime stocking stuffers this season. That include the Crop Preserver, which is the ball deodorant, the Crop Reviver, which is the ball toner, which is aloe vera and hazel extracts. It's phenomenal. Tyler can attest to that as well. He talks about it all the time. Normally he holds it up while we're on here. I just mentioned the body wash. It can also be used on your hair. So it's kind of like a 2-in-1. And then, of course, the Crop Mop Ball Wipes, which I have as well. You never know when the opportunity is going to strike. So you should always be prepared. And the Foot Duster, which Tyler cannot stop raving about, is designed to keep the stankiest feet smelling fresh. The shears, I actually do not have those. So I need to get those in the Weed Whacker nose and ear hair trimmer, which provides proprietary skin-safe technology that get rid of those nasty nose hairs. I don't really have to worry about that currently, but I'm sure I will here very soon. I'm starting to get up there in age, quarter century under my belt. So let's not forget the best trimmer for your balls and body. The Lawnmower 3.0 trimmer offers a replaceable ceramic blade with advanced skin-safe technology which helps reduce grooming accidents. These formulations are all vegan, cruelty-free, dye-free, sulfate-free, so their products are legit. You can get any of the stuff that I'm talking about at manscaped.com when you use the code 412 at checkout. That would get you 20% off plus free shipping. Again, that's manscaped.com, code 412 at checkout. You'll get 20% off plus free shipping. Maybe you were able to take advantage of the Black Friday sale, because with code 412, you actually gotten 25% off plus free shipping Black Friday through Cyber Monday. So hopefully you took advantage of that. But if not, with December coming up now, here we are, December 1st. It's time to start getting those Christmas presents. This is a great gift for your dad, brother, uncle, grandfather, whatever it might be, the guy in your life. Tell Haley to get on that.
Yeah, I actually told her that a possible Christmas present for myself. So I think she might utilize the around the 412 code whenever checking out.
Needs to. Okay, so let's dive into this. We know firsthand about what's going on in New Orleans right now, the fantasy outlook that we're seeing. Alvin Kamara's production is just down. I mean, they scored 4 rushing touchdowns this past Sunday. He had none. Taysom Hill, 2 rushing touchdowns. Latavius Murray, 2 rushing touchdowns. I would say if you are an Alvin Kamara owner, how worried are you? But you are an Alvin Kamara owner. I'm an Alvin Kamara owner. How worried are we about his production as we look at the last week of the regular season and the playoffs, when this is why you drafted this guy to carry you to a championship? So how worried are you about his production?
So the only reason I'm worried is because I don't know the timeline where Drew Brees is going to be coming back. And I think that's the night and day difference between Kamara's production. He has combined 1 catches through the last 2 weeks combined. The lowest amount of catches between any 2-week period this year. Prior to that, 11. That just shows you how mind-boggling different the offense runs with Taysom Hill and that quarterback. But if Taysom Hill is the quarterback, whenever my league goes into the fantasy football playoffs, whenever other Alvin Kamara owners, teams goes into the playoffs, it's concerning. The alarms are sounding off. I know you can't see him right now, but his red lights everywhere, like full panic button mode. It's not good, man. And it doesn't help that Latavius Murray, concurrently with Taysom Hill taking away from Kamara, is also starting to see a bigger role.
Yeah, I mean, I could regurgitate the same stuff you just said, but I'm right on board with you. And, the reason is, again, Alvin Kamara is not a guy that, is going to run for 100 yards every game. He's not that type of back. He's not Derrick Henry. He's not Dalvin Cook. What makes him so special is his ability to catch passes out of the backfield. If he's not doing that, what is his value? You're going to play him if he's on your roster, obviously, because you know what he can do when you get the ball in his hands. But that's the problem. The ball's not getting into his hands. You're seeing him run for about 40 yards a game and catching no passes out of the backfield. So you're talking about maybe a guy that you can put in your flex at this point? I don't know. But again, if he's on your roster, you're obviously going to play him. But I think that it definitely is worrisome with what his production has looked like with Taysom Hill. And again, right now, they're winning football games. Granted, it's against the Atlanta Falcons and a team that played without a quarterback in the Denver Broncos. But, so far, it's not like Taysom Hill has stopped them from winning football games. So I do think that Alvin Kamara's fantasy value, at least as like an elite RB1, is completely tied to Drew Brees. And I have a newfound appreciation for Drew Brees because of this. I was a guy like, dude, this guy needs to hang him up. He has nothing left. And, while that might be the case from a real life perspective, we've seen the arm strength go and everything like that. But what he does for Alvin Kamara, for Michael Thomas, for other guys on that team's fantasy value, I mean, it's night and day difference.
Excuse me, definitely. I remember whenever Breeze got hurt, you and I were both expecting Jameis Winston to come in.
Oh, yeah.
In a lack of a better term, kind of elevate the offense, with his ability to push the ball down the field. As crazy as that sounds, and I don't think anybody thought realistically that Taysom Hill was going to start at quarterback, let alone lead the Saints to a 2-0 record during that time. And I think that's one of the most frustrating things, is that there's not even hope for a guy like Jameis Winston to enter the game, because Taysom Hill was winning football games. Granted, it was against teams like the Falcons and the Broncos, but at the end of the day, there's still W's in the win column, So I think people like you and I, guys who own Alvin Kamara, I think we're stranded somewhat. And, as a Michael Thomas owner as well, I definitely really, really hope Drew Brees comes back very soon. But I want to flip this into what we think about Taysom Hill's fantasy impact as a quarterback moving forward, because he doesn't have a passing touchdown in his last 2 starts at quarterback. He has a turnover in each game that he started, but he scored 24 and 17 respective fantasy points his last 2 starts. He's playing Atlanta again, the second time in 3 weeks. He had 233 passing yards the first time he played Atlanta. Do you think he's a legitimate option for fantasy players?
I'm highly considering using him over Jared Goff this upcoming week. And the reason is, we were talking about right before we started this, how I tried to get way too cute with my lineup this past week and use Kendall Hinton in my flex. Well, it's kind of like I was looking for what Taysom Hill brings to that offense. I know he's like a pass for a ton of yards, but what he brings on the ground. And again, when they get inside, the 5 yard line, as Alvin Kamara owners, we would hope that he'd be the guy, but it's been either Taysom Hill or Latavius Murray. If Taysom Hill's going to give you the rushing touchdowns, who cares if they're coming through the air or on the ground? You actually get more points if they come on the ground because you're getting a point for every 10 yards as opposed to 15 or 25, depending on how you're leased. So, you'd almost rather have him have that rushing production, which he's giving you right now. So I definitely think there's a case there for, low QB1, top 2BQ potential, especially due to this matchup that he's got against Atlanta, which I know they just held the Raiders to 6 points, but I don't see that happening again. I'm not a believer in the Atlanta Falcons. I think that was kind of a one-off. They are playing much better football under Raheem Morris, but I'm still not a believer in that defense at the very least. Maybe the offense will look better. Maybe we get into a shootout, and again, that would be good for Taysom Hill as well. So,
yeah, we'll see. And I know Michael Thomas kind of had his bounce back game with Taysom Hill at quarterback versus the Falcons. So it's kind of just like a wait and see at this point. But I think I'm on the same boat as you. I really think Taysom Hill, all jokes aside, because I don't think he's a great real life quarterback, just purely fantasy perspective, I think he could do a lot worse this week.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he's projected right around 19 point something, 19.5 points or so. Now look at who my other option would be. Jared Goff coming off 5 points for me this past week. And Jared Goff next week goes against Arizona, who is giving up the 7th most points to the quarterback position. But like Jared Goff's another one of those guys. I think we've talked a lot about the boomer bust of like a guy like Tyler Lockett. Jared Goff might be that guy at the quarterback position. So I really don't know how much faith I can have putting him in my lineup because, the matchup that he had, against San Fran, like I played him in my lineup again. He got 5 points after having 25 against the Tampa Bay defense that was giving up less points to quarterbacks. So I don't know where I'm at with Jared Goff. I'm leaning towards playing Taysom Hill though over him.
Yeah, and I can't blame you, especially, since we've already seen Taysom versus a Atlanta Falcons defense very recently as well. So I don't think a whole lot's going to change there. And, for what it's worth, there are people that do kind of factor into the fact that they're playing in a dome as well. So, use that for whatever advantage you think that brings you. But yeah, I mean, Taysom Hill's fantasy production, has gone through the roof. Latavius Murray's fantasy production has gone through the roof. I mean, people are talking about Latavius Murray as a potential waiver wire ad this week. And that's crazy because, usually Latavius is kind of that handcuff role. You draft him at the end of fantasy drafts to kind of handcuff to Alvin Kamara, which is something I did. And, to see Murray outscore Kamara whenever Murray's on my bench isn't a very good feeling.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he has a little bit of standalone value. He was the type of guy. It's like, man, like I feel like I could do a lot worse in my flex, but you never know what the touches are going to be. You hope that he gets a goal line carry or two in that game. But yeah, if it's going to be consistent, yeah, this is a guy that you can play as a flex option. I mean, that's what he looks like is a solid flex option right now. So who knows? We'll see what happens against Atlanta this week. As Kamara owners, I hope that it starts to trend back in that direction.
And what's crazy is that, like, I the last couple of days, I've been trying to find anything I can on Drew Brees and when he's supposed to return. Nothing. No news, no signs of life from Drew Brees, no indications of anything.
Yeah, and, with an injury like that, you don't know. Who's to say this guy's coming back in the regular season?
Yeah.
I think that we'll see, what happens with the Saints. They're probably trying to wait it out and see, are they going to need him down the stretch? If Taysom Hill's going to win them football games, they don't need to bring Drew back before the playoffs. So we'll see what happens, especially with Tampa Bay losing another game. They have 3 games on them now for the division. I mean, it's that, so that the division at least is pretty much looking pretty comfortable for them. So now you start to look at, the potential of them locking up that number 1 seed. You have Green Bay obviously in the mix there, or Seattle, but right now, as long as Taysom Hill's winning games, there's no rush to get Drew Brees back.
Yeah, so this weekend against Atlanta will be the 3rd game that Brees will have missed since he's placed on the IR. So I do believe he'll be eligible to be brought up after that. He told NewOrleans.com, quote, "I feel better than I did last week. I feel better every day. Gradually ramping things up is what I'm able to do, understanding that there's just a healing process that has to take place. But, man, I'm pushing it. I'm trying to be back as fast as I can.
So do you have the remaining schedule right there? Obviously, we know they play Atlanta this week.
So they play Atlanta, and then that is followed by games with the Philadelphia Eagles, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Carolina Panthers. Excuse me.
Okay, so you're not going to need him, hopefully, against Atlanta or Philadelphia. So, he really doesn't have to come back until that game against KC. So we're talking another couple of weeks before you feel like, okay, they have another, big test and a big game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, there's really no rush to bring him back. But as Camaro owners, hey, strap him up, Drew. Give him a cortisone shot and throw him out there.
Man, that's what I'm saying,
Okay, so let's move on. Like I said, we want to play a little over-under game. We did this by position. We both have them. I'll start off here. I'm going to go tight end up. So I'm going to finish with my quarterback. My tight end that I chose was going to be Darren Waller here. And I'm going to say over-under 13.5 points. He had probably his second worst game of the season last week. Had just 4 catches for 24 yards in what looked like a prime matchup, but he gets another great matchup here going against the Jets. And he has the most red zone targets among tight ends in football. So again, over under 13.5 points here for Darren Waller.
I'm going to say over. I'm going to hit the over on the 13.5. Just because I think Derek Carr is going to have a bounce back week, and I'll talk about him in a little bit. I just don't think there's a way he produces 4 turnovers again in a season where he's played considerably well and nobody's really even talking about him. If I think that Derek Carr is going to kind of bounce back and follow suit, I think his number one option, Darren Waller, is going to be a very big part of that. And we talk about the Kelce's, the Kittles, Mark Andrews, if you want to put him up there. Right in that second tier, pretty much, is going to be a guy like Darren Waller, who doesn't necessarily produce dominant outings week in, week out like they normally do, but he's still, one of the top tier fantasy tight ends following those guys. So I'll definitely take the over on that.
Okay.
So my tight end this week for the over under, Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith, setting the over under at 9 points this week. He didn't receive a single target last week in his outing. He's averaging just about 10 points. So I set the bar a little bit lower than his average. Jonnu Smith this week, he is playing the Cleveland Browns. Right. Not a terrible front seven, but not a terrific one either. It's just all dependent on, how much Derrick Henry, kind of succeeds the volume of carries and whether or not Ryan Tannehill is going to continue to utilize guys like A.J. Brown and Corey Davis significantly.
Yeah, so I'm assuming that we're talking PPR. I mean, I should preface by saying that. And I'm going to say over because this is a guy, we talked about it before, is touchdown dependent. I think he catches one against Cleveland, and that's why he'll get over. Without that touchdown, he would not be over 9 points. Excuse me. Even in a PPR league, this is a guy that, maybe catches 3 passes, 20-some yards and a touchdown. But in a PPR league, that's going to get him over that 9 points because he's scoring a touchdown. So I'll say over.
Yeah, and I know we were talking about him being a touchdown-dependent tight end last week, but if they're going to continue to find ways to get him the ball in the red zone, receiving or rushing, we saw him running a touchdown a couple of weeks ago. I mean, that still counts as, points on the fantasy scoreboard, so, you can't say no to that.
Anthony just popped in here, said start 3, Justin Jefferson, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, Myles Gaskin, DeAndre Swift. Well, Justin Jefferson's obvious there.
Jefferson.
I think Josh Jacobs, assuming he plays even with that banged up ankles, is a must start guy for me.
Yeah.
And especially against the Jets. And then you start looking at, Miles Sanders, Myles Gaskin, DeAndre Swift. I wouldn't use Myles Gaskin, so I'm torn between Miles Sanders and Swift.
Wasn't Swift out last week?
Yeah, he had a concussion. So, assuming he's back and ready to go for this game, they have the Bears, which is not a very good matchup for running backs. And then Miles Sanders plays against Green Bay, which, despite Green Bay's record, is a pretty favorable matchup for running backs.
Yeah, but they haven't been using Miles Sanders a whole bunch.
I know.
The thing, guys like Boston Scott are, almost at equal levels of production and touches when it comes to Philadelphia's backfield. So even though it's a worse matchup, I still feel like I'd rather have Swift over a guy like Miles Sanders.
It's a very close call for me, and it really shouldn't be. Miles Sanders came into the year as like RB7, in mock drafts and stuff. He was very highly touted. Um, and I don't remember. No, yeah, he was a guy that I bought into the hype. Kenyon Drake, I wasn't buying into the hype in Arizona. Miles Sanders, I was buying into the hype that people were throwing out of Philadelphia. So I'm a little disappointed. Granted, he's had the injuries as well. This is close, but I think I'm with you. I think I'm with DeAndre Swift on this. We saw how Detroit was starting to use him before that concussion. He looked like he was going to be a 3-down back for them. So
and then wasn't another option Myles Gaskin? Did I hear that right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just a whole lot going on in Miami right now. Whenever if you were to bring this to me probably like 4 weeks ago, I'd probably started Gaskin just because he was killing it. Granted, the Dolphins did release Jordan Howard as well, so that gives a little bit more wiggle room for a guy like Gaskin in that backfield. But
you have Salvin Ahmed was hurt last week. I don't know if he returns this week, but he was looking very good there, and he was playing 85% of the snaps right before he got hurt. Matt Breida just came back from injury, and then they even were using Patrick Laird a little bit as well. So I would relate it kind of to if Rex Burkhead were healthy in New England Patriots backfield. And that I don't know who's going to be the guy. So I would probably avoid it for the time being. And it comes down to DeAndre Swift or Miles Sanders for me, which is a close call for what seems like absolutely no reason. It's going to be DeAndre Swift by a slight margin for the both of us.
Yeah.
But Justin Jefferson, Josh Jacobs, those two, they're locks. Okay. My wide receiver over under, I mentioned him already as a guy that I was a little bit disappointed with, and I have been, honestly, for quite a bit of the season. Tyler Lockett. So his over-under, he is projected to be the third highest scoring receiver this upcoming week, projected at 17.5 points. And I kept it at that. They go against the New York Giants, but he's failed to reach 67 yards in 6 of 7 games. It seems like if this guy doesn't score 3 touchdowns, he has 3 receptions.
Yeah, he's the bona fide definition of boomer bust, and as a Lockett owner this year, I can definitely attest to that. I got to take the under, man. Like he has not shown any signs of really stepping up to provide DK Metcalf that very nice complementary, wide receiver 1A and 1B. It's basically the DK Metcalf show. And even David Moore is starting to get mixed into the action a little bit, which is frustrating. Chris Parsons back now. He's off the injury report. Russell Wilson isn't necessarily playing at that super high MVP level that he was a little bit earlier in the year. Just a lot of working factors going against Tyler Lockett. And, granted, I'm still going to roll him out in my lineup every week, but I definitely take the under at 17 points. And, I hope I'm wrong.
Okay. Yeah, if you were asking me this question, I think I would have the same response.
It sucks. It is what it is. But I did not expect DK Metcalf to blow the lid off of his potential like he has this year.
Yeah.
And granted, Lockett's still a very good receiver.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
It feels as if teams are still somewhat kind of taking away Lockett first rather than Metcalf. And hopefully at some point that does change kind of soon.
I don't know if you remember, but I said he's my fantasy MVP for my one team because I have Alvin Kamara on that team. But my point was Alvin Kamara is obviously the best player, but Tyler Lockett was giving me production that I wasn't expecting. So that's what made him, the MVP. It's kind of the same case that I would make for why, Big Ben should be not win the MVP, but at least be getting some consideration. It's not like outlandish for him to be his name to be mentioned. It's because you're talking about best player or most valuable player. Which one is it? Because it's not the same thing, or it shouldn't be.
Yeah. And for our sake, I hope Pro Football Focus isn't listening. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what's your wide receiver over under?
So I'll keep saying the same division. DeAndre Hopkins versus
over
Los Angeles Rams. Well, you would think that 17 points versus the Los Angeles Rams. 10 points in the last 2 weeks. Hopkins has been very quiet as of late. Guys like Christian Kirk are starting to, pop up. Kyler Murray has been kind of
his shoulder. It's his shoulder.
Yep. Still dealing with that bum shoulder, as people will call it. I got to take the under, man. And I know it's crazy to talk about DeAndre Hopkins like this because we've seen what he can do. But, man, Arizona does not look very good right now. especially fantasy purposes for Hopkins.
Yeah, and I know Jalen Ramsey got banged up a little bit, but assuming he's out there, I mean, this Rams defense has been very good this year. After last year where I was expecting a lot more than how well they played, it just looked like a weird fit for Jalen Ramsey, like being playing in a zone primarily. But
Sorry, I just read the Ravens learned of 2 more positive COVID tests before they flew out to Pittsburgh.
But are they still leaving?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's play ball. But yeah, I'm going to go under as well for that reason. I think the Rams defense is playing very well right now. And on the opposite side of that, Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense is not playing very well right now. So. Who reported that one?
Mike Garofalo.
Oh.
Yeah, the Ravens learned of 2 more positive COVID-19 tests before they left for Pittsburgh, sources say. One player and one staffer at the NFL told the team these individuals were previously identified as potential positives and there was no concern for further spread.
Okay.
Sweet. Okay.
But the big concern at this point, you feel like the Ravens have to be at like the end of their transmission period. But the big concern now is, hopefully we don't, see an outbreak in Pittsburgh following this game.
Yeah, and that's why I wasn't I wasn't asking for Roger Goodell's head whenever they originally pushed the game back from Thursday to Sunday, just because, looking big picture of things, you don't want a breakout to happen in Pittsburgh, even if that does mean delaying one game. But I mean, the NFL has bent over backwards for Baltimore to keep pushing and pushing this game back. It's affected so many other games. The Steelers are going to have to play 3 games in 11 or 12 days?
12 days.
Super, super crazy. But we're here to talk about fantasy football, so I guess we're good. But even though, in case people don't know, the Ravens-Steelers game tomorrow will still count for Week 12. It's not going to be considered for Week 13. So we're still technically in this week as we talk about it.
Right. Okay. My running back should be a guy that we just saw return. Is to be Austin Eckler. Came back and scored 18.4 points in his return. Goes against New England this week. It's going to be obviously his second game back. Picked right back up where he left off. Largest target share among running backs heavily. He's got like 32% of the target share for Justin Herbert, who threw 52 passes in that game. So is over under set at 15.5 this week, playing against a New England team pretty solid against at least running backs, limiting them to fantasy production. But I'm curious to get your take on this. I know where I stand as an Austin Eckler owner, but again, 15.5 is going to be where I set the over under on this.
I think I gotta like the over in that, and that's just due to what Austin Eckler has proved capable of doing game in and game out. I mean, he came back after a long extended period where it looked like some other guys in the Chargers backfield were going to take over, and he came back and he's like, "No, man, this is my backfield. Go ahead, find another team to lead on because this is my team." And he went out and proved it. Justin Herbert struggled a little bit. Yes, he is human. He struggled a little bit last week in the Chargers game, but I think New England, especially with a guy like Stephon Gilmore in the secondary, they're going to at least try to limit what Justin Herbert does through the year. And I think that'll open things up a little bit more for a guy like Austin Eckler. But it's to the point where I almost don't care what matchup Eckler has, just because I know the work through the ground and through the air that he's going to get.
Yeah, I'd be hammering that over if I saw that. I think so too. I think he gets over 15.5. I mean, think about it. If this guy catch like 11 passes in that game or something like that, something ridiculous, he does that in a PPR league, he's getting 15.5 points easily. So he doesn't need to rush for a ton of yards, similar to Alvin Kamara. He's not going to run the ball incredibly effectively between the tackles or anything like that. But what he does out of the backfield, catching the passes, that's where his fantasy value comes from. And unlike Alvin Kamara right now, he's got a quarterback that's going to be able to provide those touches for him.
Yep. No, most definitely. And, talking about one running back who's able to go through the ground or through the air to another one, Antonio Gibson had himself a very, very nice Thanksgiving Day. You're pounding your fist because you're an Antonio Gibson owner. Props to you. Facing the Pittsburgh Steelers defense this week. Got the hammer out. I like it. Over-under setting at 15 points. He's averaging 16, but he has hit the 15-point mark the last 4 out of 5 weeks. He is red hot. But do you think the Steelers front seven, widely considered to be one of the best in the league, to slow him down?
They still are, and I think that we'll see what happens. Hopefully, Stephon Tuitt is back for that game as well, because that will be a factor in stopping him and everything like that. And I still think the Steelers win this game, but I'm going to say over because this guy's a touchdown machine. The Steelers could win this game by 17 to 20 points. It doesn't mean Antonio Gibson's not going to do his fantasy production in this game. I mean, the dude does nothing besides score touchdowns. So say he finds the end zone again, he'll find 10 points between catching passes out of the backfield and the yards he's going to get, because if he gets that touchdown, again, he's 6 points of the way there. So I like him to hit the over in above 16 in most weeks, just because, like I said, this guy's scoring touchdowns with an S every single week.
Yeah, and especially with a guy like Devin Bush, who's not currently present in the Steelers' front seven, that kind of does leave you a little bit wary. I know I trust Robert Spillane to meet anybody in the middle of the Broadway and kind of stop them in their tracks, but coverage-wise and sideline to sideline ability, he's just not Devin Bush, and we've seen a handful of running backs this year kind of have their way in the passing game with them. So Antonio Gibson, I think I might take that over as well.
Okay, my quarterback over-under is going to be Deshaun Watson. It's going to be over or under 23.5 points. Goes against Indy this week. Pretty solid defense, but we just saw what happened against Tennessee. But that's more on the ground. So we're talking about Deshaun Watson, the quarterback here, over under 23.5 points, which he has gotten over that number in 8 of the last 9 outings.
That's tough.
We also have taken consideration no Will Fuller.
That's right, and I'm going to say that. I'm going to say under, and I'll kind of tell off of a point where I'm going to talk about Duke Johnson here in a little bit. No Will Fuller, no Randall Cobb. DeAndre Hopkins is living it up in the desert now.
Just released Kenny Stills?
No. Yep. Kenny Stills isn't there anymore. No. Nobody but Brandon Cooks, basically. And, I think defenses are going to be a little bit more inclined to sack the box and kind of force Deshaun Watson to throw to guys like me and you, basically. And we saw Deshaun Watson, at least his fantasy production, or at least his fantasy ceiling, kind of dip without the presence of DeAndre Hopkins. And I think you can kind of expect that a little bit more with guys, he'll be thrown to who's not super familiar with throwing to on game days, week in, week out. So I'm going to take the under. And that's not a slight on him. That's a slight to his situation.
Yeah. That's so tough for me because Deshaun Watson, you could argue, I think, is having the best year of his career. It's just kind of flying under the radar. The Texans aren't very good. He lost a star receiver in a trade, but he's been phenomenal this year without having that, one alpha guy. Granted, Will Fuller had been exceptional prior to his suspension. Brandon Cooks had, a couple weeks where he looked like he was the guy. But their wide receiver room was kind of similar to the Steelers, where there wasn't like a clear-cut alpha. You just had some guys that were really good. Now, without Will Fuller, Kenny Stills not there, Randall Cobb being hurt, it's tough. I feel like he's going to have to give you something on the ground as well in this game to reach that over. Yeah. I'm very torn on this. I think he'll be right around it. So I'll say under. I'm sorry, slightly. I think he gets like 22 points.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. I don't think he's going to come out and lay like a goose egg.
Yeah.
In the scoreboard this week. If he does hit over 23.5 points and hit that 24-point mark, I won't be surprised at all because it is Deshaun Watson. But it's just not having the benefit of hindsight and kind of trying to read into everything. The tea leaves don't look very good for him. So, kind of finishing up the over/under segment, Justin Herbert, a guy I've been super high on after whiffing in the draft so far on him. Over-under of 20 points versus the New England Patriots defense last week, was the second time in his fantasy starting career where he hit under 20 points as a starter. What do you think? The Patriots slouch. Stephon Gilmore is in that defensive secondary. The Patriots, they somewhat get after the quarterback. There's nothing to really love about them outside of Gilmore.
Do you know? Okay, so let me look at something real quick before I answer this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no, he had 33 the week before that, 24, 27. I was trying to look at his list of recent games just because I was curious if he was maybe starting to hit like that rookie wall that we always talk about. But I mean, the game before that, he had 33 against the Jets. So, granted, that was the Jets. Where's this game at?
Pretty sure it's at home. Let me double check for you.
Okay. Well, I like that a lot better than if it's in New England.
At home versus New England. beautiful palm trees of LA.
I'm going to say over, and I don't think it's by a lot. I think he gets right around 20 because this is a relatively tough matchup. I think that, we haven't even seen him play much with Austin Eckler yet, and that's to be huge for him. Obviously, you have Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry there, but now this new weapon that he hasn't really gotten to use that much in Austin Eckler, I think he's going to benefit tremendously from that. And, I know that Buffalo's defense held him in check, and Buffalo's defense, where are they at compared to the Patriots defense? But being that this game's at home, I'll take the over on this. If it was in New England, I would probably take the under slightly as opposed to over slightly.
Yeah, I'll take the over, and I'm right there with you. It's in the nice sunny confines of LA, where Justin Herbert does play his home football games. And, we keep talking about we expect him to kind of hit this rookie wall, and he hasn't really hit it yet. I mean, only 2 starts basically out of the entire year where he's been the starter, where he scored under 20 fantasy points. Pretty darn good. I see nothing that the Patriots kind of present as a problem, because I'll trust Keenan Allen to win matchups over Stephon Gilmore all day of the week. And then you have deep threats like Mike Hilton, you have Hunter Henry in the red zone, things and so on and so forth. And, the presence of a guy like Austin Eckler does help a lot, both in terms of helping boost his numbers and kind of taking a little bit of pressure off of him by establishing a really good running game as well. So I'll take the over.
Okay, so let's move along to guys that we would start, guys that we would sit. I'll start off once again. I'm going to do tight end, 2 quarterbacks. So a tight end that I really like this week is to be TJ Hawkinson. I don't necessarily love this matchup with Chicago, but with what TJ Hawkinson has been doing, sans Kenny Golladay, I think he's a must start at the tight end position. And my sit is going to be Logan Thomas. We always talk about in years past the Steelers giving up production to tight ends. They've given up 1 touchdown this year to tight ends, and that was Noah Fant back in week 2. So since then, they have not given up a touchdown to tight ends. Logan Thomas, incredibly reliant on scoring touchdowns to have any type of fantasy production. Do not like him this week. I would not have him in your lineup.
Yeah, and I can't disagree with anything you just said. Logan Thomas, I thought about putting him in my sit column. Then Hawkinson, I wanted to put him in the start column, but I felt like that might have been just a little bit too obvious because I feel like if you do have a guy like Hawkinson, you're going to play him.
Yeah, he's starting to be, he entered this year as like a borderline tight end 1, kind of right in that range where like we liked Hayden Hurst. Yeah. But now he's, right there behind. We mentioned, obviously Kittle out, but you have Kelsey, you have Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson might be like just behind those guys at this point.
Oh, definitely. He's starting to kind of produce and find the footing. He's kind of starting to fill that role that a lot of people thought Eric Ebron should have hit during his time as a Detroit Lion as well. So my tight end start of the week is going to be Kyle Rudolph versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars are one of 6 teams allowing double-digit fantasy points averaged per game to tight ends. Rudolph's coming off a near 14-point performance. I tried to dig a little bit deeper this week, since I feel like if you have a really good tight end, you're going to start him. Rudolph, while he has been kind of boom or bust per se, last couple of weeks, I feel like he's been doing an okay job, and I feel like he could do a lot worse at the tight end position. Sitting this week, Hayden Hurst versus the New Orleans Saints. I don't need to say anything else, man. Tired of the roller coaster. But, Hayden Hurst usually has his best games with Julio Jones on the field to take away, a little bit of pressure from him. Julio Jones dealing with I believe it's a groin or a hamstring injury. Didn't play last week. He's a little bit questionable this week. And if that's a little bit more attention going to Hayden Hurst, I don't like him at all.
Yeah, I really like the Kyle Rudolph pick there. Like if you were saying a long shot, you could say him. Maybe even like Irv Smith Jr. scores a touchdown this week against Jacksonville. But okay, moving along to wide receivers. Wide receiver that I really like this week finally scores a touchdown last week. Starting to come on there. In Cleveland, Jarvis Landry going against the Titans this week. The Titans are not good against receivers. They're giving up the 7th most points to them. They're absolutely terrible on third down. Guess where Jarvis Landry is at his best? On third down, especially because that team runs the football on first and second down. So when they finally do decide to pass, obviously no Odell Beckham Jr. there. Baker Mayfield has been better with that being the case. Jarvis Landry, the number 1 option in that passing game. He's starting to come on. I really like this matchup for him. And then my sit guy is going to be Darius Slayton going against Seattle. Been kind of a roller coaster, and it's not necessarily his fault. The quarterback play with Daniel Jones, obviously always erratic. Now he's not even there. They moved to Colt McCoy, so Darius Slayton is a guy I would not have in my lineup this week.
Yeah, Slayton's kind of boom or bust, especially with a guy like Daniel Jones out. And, the the Giants potentially looking for another option like quarterbacks, just an entire mess already at Saquon out, letting you throw Daniel Jones into the fire.
They're in first place.
Yeah. It's a damn shame. One team from that division is not only going to go to the playoffs, but they'll be able to host a playoff game. Yeah. it's not good. They really need to look at that in the offseason. My start for the wide receiver position this week, I already kind of talked about him a little bit. Brandon Cooks versus the Indianapolis Colts. It's him and guys like me and you in that receiver core. After that, whole lot of people either hurt, released, or traded. Basically, the only wide receiver in Houston for the time being. He is double-digit scoring last 6 of 7 weeks. I really like the opportunity for him this week. Granted, Indianapolis is no slouch on the defensive side of the ball, but Brandon Cooks, who else is Deshaun going to throw to? So I'm plugging him in my start column this week. My sit column, this might be a surprise to you, and our large portion of the listener base might not like this. Juju Smith-Schuster, I'm going to sit him versus the Washington football team, one of the best defenses, pass defense, in the NFL. I feel like every week, one Steelers receiver kind of has to take a step down. I feel like the football team, really going to focus in on Juju. That gives more room for guys like Claypool and Deontay Johnson, maybe even Ray McCloud to have himself a day. We'll see. But yeah, Juju, a phenomenal player. I just think this week his card's kind of drawn out of the deck.
Funny that we're talking about that game because we still have to watch Pittsburgh play tomorrow, their Week 12 game. We're talking about his Week 13 matchup. But I think that I would tend to agree with that with the way that Washington's pass defense is set up. Deontay Johnson's going to get somewhere between 12 to 15 targets. And I like the prospects of Chase Claypool having a big day against them over the prospects of Juju if I were to have to pick one of them. So, yeah, I definitely have to agree that he's probably the third fiddle for that game in particular. My running back start, finally. I feel like we finally saw something this past Sunday instead of keep carrying over. The opportunity's been there. Now we see the production to keep rolling. David Montgomery of the Chicago Bears is going to be my start. Goes against Detroit. I don't need to say more than that as far as the matchup goes. And he's finally starting to produce on all these touches he's getting. Obviously, without Tariq Cohen there, he's just been a touch monster when on the field. Now he's back healthy. He had a pretty solid game against the Packers on Sunday Night Football. I just want to see that continue over. So he's going to be my start guy at the position. My sit guy, pains me to say this, it's going to be Todd Gurley going against the Saints. We kind of already we've talked about Atlanta. I feel like a lot on this show already. We've also talked about this matchup in particular with the Saints quite a bit already. But when it comes to Atlanta, they're obviously a pass first offense. We'll see about Julio Jones coming back. I'm not sure there. New Orleans are very good against the run when you have the front seven that they do with Cam Jordan and Demario Davis in the middle of it. Very good against running backs. I don't like Todd Gurley this week, and he's a guy that's incredibly touchdown dependent. So should he not get into the end zone, you're talking about like a low floor flex play out of Todd Gurley.
Yeah, and it's so weird because normally those New Orleans-Atlanta matchups are just fantasy haven, points being able to be scored everywhere, but that hasn't really been the case this year, especially with them still being very fresh and familiar with each other, playing twice in the last 3 weeks. I can't blame you at all for the Todd Gurley pick, and I also can't blame you at all for the David Montgomery pick. I was on a David Montgomery hype train whenever he was a rookie, and it made me look dumb. I had him ranked higher than almost any other rookie running back that year, but he's looked phenomenal. He's finally gotten able to take over the reins as RB1 in Chicago, and he looks damn good doing it. So my start running back of the week, kind of a toss-up. It depends on who is healthy in his backfield. But if Jonathan Taylor's out, I really like Nyheim Hines versus the Houston Texans defense, fresh off of a very nice 17-point performance going against the second worst run defense in the NFL. And if Jonathan Taylor is healthy, put Jonathan Taylor in the spot for Nyheim Hines for that as well. The Colts, they're starting to move the ball very well. I don't know if that's a little bit of Phillip Rivers kind of settling into his new scheme, or if that's just, the Colts offensive line being one of the better ones in the league, and Quentin Nelson just paving the way for anybody who wants to run football behind him. So I really like either of those Colts running backs. And then my sit of the week, your boy, because I remember you talking about that you had him, Duke Johnson versus the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going to sit him. He's coming off a strong performance. I will say that. I had to face against him in fantasy football. I'm not very fond of him. I just think that defenses now with basically everybody gone in the Texans receiving room. They're going to be more inclined to kind of stack the box and dare Deshaun Watson to try to throw and make plays to guys who they're not so sure can make those plays, And I don't think that mixed with CJ Procise getting a decent amount of red zone carries kind of bodes well for his fantasy outlook this week.
Yeah, so obviously I have Antonio Gibson locked and loaded in my lineup, and David Montgomery's going to play for me now. So he might, he was probably getting some flex consideration, but I could play, obviously, Devontae Adams, my wide receiver one, Robert Woods, and Deontay Johnson, probably going to be both better options, I think, for this week, as opposed to Duke Johnson. So that's probably what I do. So I don't have to use him in my lineup, thank God, because I agree with you, I don't love the matchup. Going to my quarterbacks, my start is going to be Kirk Cousins, surprisingly enough. 12-1 touchdown interception ratio the last 5 games. So, I mean, he's not turning the football over. He's throwing enough touchdowns to give you some fantasy production. He still takes a backseat to Dalvin Cook in the running game when healthy. But when they get down into the red zone, I mean, he's got weapons like Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson. Hopefully Adam Thielen is back for this game because they can absolutely feast against this Jacksonville defense, who I'm pretty sure, I'm not totally sure. I haven't gotten the call yet, but I might be starting at corner for this game. So, so I really like Kirk Cousins in this matchup. My sit, unfortunately, is going to be Big Ben. And we already kind of talked about that Washington pass defense, being what it is. Going back to it, I still think the Steelers win this game, but I don't think that it's a huge day through the air for Ben Roethlisberger. I think that Washington's an underrated defense, and they were pretty solid on defense last year, and they've carried it over to this year, obviously adding a piece like Chase Young. Fuller is a very good cornerback. I feel like he kind of flies under the radar himself. They're good at all 3 levels, and they're a very good defense. I don't think Ben Roethlisberger has a huge day against them.
Yeah, I debated Roethlisberger being kind of put in this position myself. I just don't know because the Steelers receiving core is so talented. There's a lot of depth to it. But then again, the Washington football team does a tremendous job of taking away some of your team's best pass catchers, and I don't trust James Conner to carry a team right now. It's not necessarily him.
No,
a lot of Pittsburgh's up front 5 linemen. It's a lot of Randy Fichtner.
Here's how I could see it happening, though, is Ben gets us down near the goal line, and then Benny Snell or James Conner finishes off most of the drives. Or it ends in a field goal because Washington keeps us out of the end zone. I just don't think Ben has a huge day through the air. I think he'll be efficient enough, and with the weapons he has, get us down into the red zone. But then I could see a lot of drives either turning to the run game or stalling at that point because of how good Washington is on that side of the football.
Definitely. To kind of wrap the segment up, starting quarterback of the week in my start column, Derek Carr versus the New York Jets, and this surprised a lot of people just because he had a terrible outing last week. 4 turnovers, 3 fumbles, 1 interception. The Jets are currently allowing the 3rd most yards through the air. Derek Carr, in my humble opinion, will not turn the ball over that many times again. I think he has a nice little bounce back game. He's having a season where not a lot of people are talking about him, but he's put up pretty decent numbers. He's produced against, the top defenses or top teams, such as Kansas City twice and Tampa Bay whenever they mollywop them on primetime football. So I really like Derek Carr to bounce back this week. My sit of this week, quarterback position, Matt Ryan versus the New Orleans Saints. We're already talking about how good these matchups typically are for fantasy purposes, but New Orleans just allowing 15 fantasy points to quarterbacks. Ryan had a modest 13-point outing last week, and the possibility of no Julio Jones just, further mixes that salt into the soup I don't want to drink.
Can't argue it. Definitely like the Derek Carr pick to bounce back, though.
Thank you.
My waiver wire, just to wrap this show up, start with tight end. I'm going to do Trey Burton here. Only just 19% of the leagues. Now, you talk about a guy that needs to score touchdowns to have fantasy production. That is absolutely the definition of Trey Burton. It's just weird because, all the tight ends that they have there and never knowing who the guy's going to be. But he's only just 19% of the leagues. Face Houston this week. I think he very well could find the end zone. And for that reason, I'm willing to throw a dart on this if you're really starving for a tight end and not getting any production from the guy currently on your roster.
Yeah, you could definitely do a lot worse whenever it comes to tight ends. I mean, I feel like we always talk about them being kind of boom or bust, whenever it comes to guys outside of the top tier, but you could definitely do a lot worse than that. My tight end is going to be Jimmy Graham, rostered and just at 50%, so he does meet our threshold. Jimmy Graham this week going against the Detroit Lions. He doesn't necessarily put up terrible numbers. He's not really going to have that big week outside of that Atlanta game in week 3 where he drops 24 fantasy points. But just his recent outings, 8 points, 3, 17, and 6.2 last week versus the Green Bay Packers. If you're scouting the waiver wire for fantasy, tight ends, you could definitely do a lot worse than him. Jimmy Graham also gives you that upside in the red zone every week. I know Cole Kmet starting to kind of introduce himself into that system, but for the current time being, Jimmy Graham is still the guy.
Moving along to another pass catcher at the wide receiver position. Obviously, everybody knows about A.J. Brown in Tennessee, but my wide receiver waiver wire pickup is going to be Corey Davis. Just a little bit over, kind of broke our rule here. He's on in 52% of Yahoo leagues, but this matchup against Cleveland is too mouthwatering to not have him as my guy. You talked about the attention being taken away from a guy like A.J. Brown. Corey Davis is going to be the main beneficiary from that. Teams have to start focusing on A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown's still going to get his, even with that being the case. But Corey Davis should be the main beneficiary because of that, even though they are a run-first offense. I do like Corey Davis a lot this week against Cleveland.
Yeah, Corey Davis kind of playing second fiddle to A.J. Brown when a lot of people thought that Corey Davis was going to be the wide receiver one in
the overall pick.
Yeah, they picked him very, very high, and he ended up just not being that guy for them. So my waiver wire pickup of the week is going to be a very familiar name, Jacoby Myers, rostered in about 45% of ESPN leagues. Had a nice little 10-point outing last week. Cam Newton's not going to throw 300 yards a game. I think we've all kind of come to terms with that. But whenever he does target a Patriots wide receiver, it's normally Jacoby Myers. Also, by the way, Julian Edelman just went on the reserve COVID list, so he'll be out for a stretch of games as well. N'Keal Harry doesn't scare me at all. They go on the road this week to the Los Angeles Chargers, so hopefully that will be a high-scoring offensive game where Myers will get a lot of looks.
You just mentioned Jacoby Myers had 10 fantasy points. That's in a game where Cam Newton completed 9 passes for 84 yards.
Yep.
So if that passing offense provides anything, it's going to be Jacoby Myers as the main beneficiary. I mean, look at these numbers. 5 receptions, 52 yards. Bird had 3 for 33. James White had 1 for -1. I mean, it's the Jacoby Myers show in that passing attack right now. So I think that'd be a very underrated pickup, and I'm surprised he's not owned anymore. We've been talking about him on and off for a couple of weeks now. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's hard to really put confidence in any of the pass catchers in New England, especially if Cam Newton's not throwing the ball like, everybody kind of thought he would. A lot of people picked Cam to win MVP this year after the Patriots picked him up, but he's just not winning football games due strictly to his arms. But they still managed to pull out a W last week.
Yeah. Okay, my running back here, maybe going a little off the map, is going to be Cam Akers of the Rams. Owning 30% of the leagues. It looks like Darrell Henderson is still a little bit bothered by that quad injury. They gave him just 10 touches. Cam Akers was kind of right there. He obviously broke off the one long run, and this could kind of be, obviously being a rookie running back, they're not always thrown into a position, like where they're the starter day one. Sometimes they're worked into the system. We saw DeAndre Swift not be the guy right away. He's been worked in, and now he looks like he's going to be a 3-down back there. Cam Akers, it took him a little bit longer, but we could start seeing him take over that lead back role for the Rams. And if that's the case, get him right now for this playoff push while he's only just 30% in leagues. Even if it doesn't happen, I mean, you took a chance. You can stash him on your bench or whatever. But again, only just 30% in leagues, I think you do a lot worse than stash a guy like Cam Akers on your bench and hoping that this prediction of mine comes true where he ends up being the lead back by the time that we really get into the thick of things here as you make your playoff push.
Yeah, and to quote Leonardo DiCaprio in Wolf of Wall Street, do not judge me by my wins, judge me by my losses, because we have so few. We have won people a ton of fantasy football teams. I think we'll continue to do that. So, solid advice there. Whenever the Rams took Cam Akers in the 3rd down, everybody kind of, looked around and thought he would be the next Todd Gurley. It's a little bit too early for that prediction right now, but, granted, whenever he does get the looks, he does look very, very good. But switching from Cam Akers, a very young running back, to probably the oldest running back in the league, Frank Gore, 18.9% rostered.
Talked about him last week.
What's he doing, man? 15 points 2 weeks ago, 11 points this week. That's without a touchdown, by the way. going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, a game where I'm not too concerned about game script going against the Jets' way. I don't expect him to win at all, but Frank Gore, evidently for some reason in 2020 is still the main guy for the New York Football Jets. Look for him to continue, hopefully hit that double-digit mark once more.
We just had a question, actually, real quick before we wrap up with our quarterbacks. Was the workload we saw for Chris Carson and Raheem Mostert in their returns the new normal, or were they being eased back in?
That's tough because Carson got off the injury report a couple days prior. He got off the injury report during the weekend before that Monday night game, which, by the way, I got screwed on because I had Seahawks -6.5, and that 2-point conversion at the end did me in. Not complaining, not worried. Who's even talking about it? But Carlos Hyde was featured prominently in that game, and I don't know if that
15 touches, 15 carries.
Yeah, I don't know if that was just the Seahawks wanting to kind of work Carson back into his normal role, or I don't know if they actually legitimately plan on using Carlos Hyde moving forward. Raheem Mostert and San Francisco, I think there's so many running backs in that backfield. It's really kind of like just a who gets hot, case scenario week by week for me. I think whenever he is healthy, Mostert is the RB1 in San Francisco, but they're not worried about who's carrying the ball just because I feel like any of those running backs can have that impact.
That's the thing, is he's the RB1, but how close is the RB2 to that RB1?
Yeah.
I think in the Carson situation, before looking at these numbers, I would have said they're just easing him back in. But Carlos Hyde performed very well in Carson's absence. So you would think, even with Carson coming back, I mean, they could benefit from using that two-back system. I don't think a guy like Travis Homer or DJ Dallas is going to take away from his workload. But, a guy like Carlos Hyde very well could. Like we said, 15 touches, 14 touches, 15 touches. In the two games prior to Chris Carson returning, Carlos had a rushing touchdown in both those games as well. They both had the same amount of catches last night in that game against Philly. So, Carlos Hyde was 17 touches even in a game that Chris Carson played. I would be watching that one very closely. I would say there's a better chance, though, of Chris Carson regaining his role than Raheem Mostert, just because there's not as many mouths to feed, in my opinion. I think, like you said, in San Francisco, yes, Raheem Mostert is the RB1, but how close is the RB2 to him when everybody's healthy? Obviously, not everybody's been healthy at the same time, but if you have him, Jerick McKinnon, Tevin Coleman, Jeff Wilson Jr., they had JaMychal Hasty start a game for them. They brought him up from practice squad. There's so many running backs in that room, and they feel like they can go to any of them. I like Chris Carson's role, even with the emergence, if you will, of Carlos Hyde in that offense a little bit more than Raheem Mostert's.
Yeah, I don't watch every Seahawks game, although I do try to catch a handful of them. I think Carson's role kind of returns to his prominency next week. I think last week was just kind of just make sure we don't overwork him. Let's make sure Carlos Hyde still kind of, gets his whatever touches they want him to get per game. I definitely feel more comfortable in Chris Carson's role, whereas Raheem Mostert, was kind of trying to figure things out there.
But what I will say too, you expect the 49ers, as much as they're going to run the ball, I still think Raheem Mostert's a fine play, like an low-end RB2 flex guy. So I don't think that, they're long-term, or I say long-term, but we're doing it the last week of the regular season. So I don't think the rest of the season outlook by any means I'm worried about, but I do like Chris Carson's outlook a little bit better than that. So to wrap up here, my quarterback waiver wire, I already mentioned it for the same reasons I'll bring up here. Kirk Cousins going against Jacksonville, owning just 40% of the league's 12-1 touchdown interception ratio the last 5 weeks. Obviously, the emergence of Justin Jefferson, which I say emergence, but we're talking about the entire season, really. He's done this. And Adam Thielen, who has 11 touchdowns on the season, and he just missed their last game. So we'll see if he's able to return. That would obviously be a huge boost for that offense. You really like Kyle Rudolph this week. Obviously, you have Dalvin Cook in the backfield. Minnesota, I feel like their record does not reflect the football team that they are. And I know a lot of that is on the shoulders of Kirk Cousins, because that dude is a roller coaster. He either looks like a top 10 quarterback or a bottom 10 quarterback, just depending on which week it is. But I think that that's a much better football team than their record would indicate. And I think against Jacksonville, they're going to show it.
Well, it's definitely, man. I think my quarterback waiver wire suggestion of the week is kind of the definition of a roller coaster. 3 good games a year, and then it kind of just fizzles out. I think it's time to fire him up this week, Smitty. A lot of people are needing some help to get into their fantasy football playoffs. It's Ryan Fitzmagic, baby, 20% owned in ESPN leagues going against the piss poor Cincinnati Bengals defense, coming off of a phenomenal game last week where he scored 19.28 points. He's had a game. We had a 3-game stretch. Early this year where he scored 21 or more points. 4 games. He's ripping it right now. They benched Tua. He's not looking too great right now, whether that's due to injury or just his normal play. Ryan Fitzpatrick has literally not a GD thing to lose going out there, slinging the football. You need big points. Turn to Fitzmagic this week.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Bold and brash.
What?
I said bold and brash.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, he's going to have a few really good games. One of those games obviously already came in that Thursday night game against Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. I don't remember if he has another like really standout performance this year, but I think that this game could definitely be that for him.
Yeah, if there's any team you're rolling the dice on, it's the Cincinnati Bengals pass defense, baby.
Yes. Okay, so I'm running out of time to talk about this, but let's talk about rocking around the 412 again. Our Christmas mission, which is going to surpass last year's donations, nearly doubling them. We expect them to. It's been unbelievable, the number of donations that we've gotten, the generosity, obviously everybody helping share it. I mean, we can't, talk about the outpouring enough of support that we've gotten for this thing. Obviously, it's a great mission. We know that. That's why we do it, but we're happy that you guys want to be a part of it as well. We have 13 prizes to give away to people that donate at least $20. Obviously, all the autographed memorabilia that we have. There's a James Conner jersey. That one isn't signed. A pair of tickets to a Penguins game. Obviously, when we are allowed to get fans back in the stadiums, and as well as, the NHL PA and NHL can come to an agreement, because right now they're trying to pay them like 40% less than what they're supposed to. And then obviously we're going to do the pirate tickets as well, like we always do. And then Donnie here is going to make a donation as well for a prize. If, one person that we're going to pick their name, it's going to be very traditional how we do this, by the way. December 12th, I'm going to be here in front of the camera. I'm going to have a hat full of everybody's name who donated at least $20. And I'm literally going to pick that name out of a hat and show it to the camera. Anyways, when it gets time to do this, Donnie is going to buy you one of our brand new pieces of merchandise from Crowworthy's shop, the Around the 412 merch that just dropped recently that you've seen Tyler and I wear on the show. So, Donnie, we appreciate that contribution to the fundraiser, of course. But yeah, again, you guys have done so much. We're going to raise over $4,000 this year, be able to help out 5 or 6 families. It's more than we imagined when we set out doing this. And as I look around my basement right now, I'm just looking at all the boxes of stuff that's come so far from Amazon and stuff. So it's been unbelievable to be a part of this. And I can't thank you guys enough for being a part of it as well. If you still want to get involved, like I said, you have 11 more days to donate to be eligible for prizes. You can just search our Twitter name at Around the 412 and the word rock, and it will come up right away. It will be a video of me explaining the mission, what's going on, with a link right to the GoFundMe. But other than that, I'll tell you guys about Keats Barbershop. We will get out of here, and then you can tweet at us and let us know that you got into the playoffs after this week. So Keats Barbershop is an old-fashioned barbershop. It's located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. He's open 11 to 7 Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 4 on Saturday. And every Tuesday, he does $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. Again, that's Keats Barbershop at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. Donnie, do you have anything else?
No, just get those rocking around the 412 donations in. Get those fantasy football lineups set in. Now's the time. Spend all year talking.
Take a break.
Huffing and puffing our chest out. Now it's time to make the money, baby. Let's go. Let's go, man. Super excited.
My teams right now are in first, second, and third place. Granted, that third place is hanging on by a string at 6 and 5 because everybody's like 6 and 5 or 5 and 6. So it's going to come down to the points for playoff spots. So we'll see. But everybody, we can't thank you enough for listening to another episode of the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show. This has been a presentation of Crowworthy. Winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, fantasy, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Around the 412. Follow them at Crowworthy. Visit the Pittsburgh City page at crowworthy.com for podcasts such as this one, blogs, gambling advice, fantasy advice, all that good stuff and more. Until next week, go get that W, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.